Hi guys, here is a Secular Progress Indicator class module from Pandit Excel. Use it on user forms and worksheets when working with large data that takes a long time to process. This will keep your user engaged knowing that the application is not stuck but is doing something and the process won't take time. Above all, it will give your application a professional look and the user will automatically love and trust your program. Another good thing is that while this progress indicator is processing, no matter how long the process is, your program will allow important events to happen. For example, if I drag this user form while it's processing, the buffer will pause and then continue after I'm done. I can even close the application before the process is finished, and the application will not get stuck or freeze like what usually happens when the user interferes with an ongoing process. When that happens, users often feel like they are under attack and they suspect that your application has a virus or something. So this buffer is perfect for web scraping, which sometimes take time depending on the size of the data, internet connection, and the queries involved. There are three buffer types in this class module: the loading buffer, the progress buffer, and the rewind or countdown buffer. All these come in different sizes so that you will have more flexibility depending on what you intend to do. They also come with manipulatable properties that could be used to inform the user about what's happening now, e.g., connecting to the server, gathering data, importing the data, etc. On the user forms, you can target a specific frame to show progress on that section of your application. However, if you want, you can use this as a standalone buffer to show progress specifically on a worksheet and even on a user form built application. Let me show you how simple it is to integrate this progress indicator to your spreadsheet. Download source files from my website and then open this practice file. Unblock, enable macros or trust the file when prompted. Open the VB editor, right-click on the Project Explorer and import this class module file. When done, you should have a file entitled Pandit Secular Buffer under the Class Modules folder. Let's start with the worksheet. In this worksheet, I'm generating a report for a specific property from this detailed ledger. The code loops through the ledger, searching for the required information to produce a refined report for a selected property. This is not a good example because the report is a bit fast. The code is well done and the data source is not that big, but I will use it for demonstration. Now, to add a progress buffer, you will need a user form to display the progress indicator. So I will add a small user form like so. We need only the form, and we won't do anything on it. Everything else will be done in the code that processes the data. This is the code that generates the report. At the top of this module, I will declare a new instance of our class module like so. Dim buffer as new Pandit Secular Buffer. Now pay attention. When running the progress buffer on a loop statement, you need to write the buffer code within the loop. For example, if you have a for statement that looks like this, you need to call the buffer within the loop right here. This code that I have right here is a kind of a loop statement. When the code execution hits this line of code, the code execution is sent back to this line to search for another transaction until the search is finished. So above this line, I will write my buffer like so, buffer.run, and then select progress for the buffer type. If I place another comma, I will be required to specify where I need to add the buffer. Here, I will write the name of the user form we added. Let me place another comma. Here I can choose the size I want from the list. This is an optional parameter and the size is by default extra large. So I will omit this because I want the default size. Now if I place another comma, I will specify how many times will this code be executed. If you selected progress or rewind, you must specify how many times. This code already has calculated how many transactions are there in a selected property. So I will just pass in the variable t right here. That's it. This call to run the buffer as the code executes. What's left now is to remove the buffer. This is very important. The buffer must be removed and destroyed. So at the end of this sub-procedure, I must write buffer.remove. Press the space button and then select true. I repeat, on a worksheet progress indicator, you must select true to destroy the buffer when the process is done. Please take note of that. That's it. We are done. Now if I go back to the worksheet, select a new property, the buffer will run and be discarded when the process is done. If for some reason I want to use rewind or countdown, I will go back to the code and change the buffer type to rewind. Now if I run the code, I will get a rewind progress indicator. If you are not sure how long the process will take, or you just can't get the total right, you can change your buffer type to loading and don't have to write the total there. This will run the loading buffer instead, and it will be discarded automatically by the remove method we added at the end of the procedure. The status depicted here is by default loading. You can change this and write whatever you want in your own language via the status property. I recommend doing this at the top of the procedure before the loop so that the code will be executed only once. So here I can write buffer.status is equal to string wait. And if I select a new property in the list, you will notice that the status is now changed to wait. Now if I go back to the code, press the period key again here, you will notice that there are more properties related to status. The font name, size, bold, and font color. You can use these properties to style your status according to your preference. If you want to show a detailed message to the user, you can use the message property to do so. If I want to display one message throughout, I can do it outside the loop right here, where I specified the message like so. However, if I want to display different messages based on different conditions, I can do so within the loop by writing an if statement or something. As for this project, a single message will suffice, so I will stick with this. Now every time I select a new property, the message will always be displayed to the user saying, "Processing, please wait." Like the status property, the message property can be customized based on your preference. You already know how the buffer works, so we will stick with the important things to know. Here in our practice user form, I have written the same code that filters property transactions from the ledger and displays a report that is understandable to the user. I'm using the list view for the report instead of the cells this time. I have put this list view in a frame so that I can use the same frame to display the buffer. Yes, on a user form, we target specific frames where processing takes place. Good. Let's go to the code that does that. At the top of this module, I will declare a new instance of our class like so. Please note that if you have more than one frame and you want to show progress on each frame, you must also declare separate instances of each class at the top, e.g. buffer1, buffer2, etc. Also make sure that your entire application is built on a base frame, not on the user form. This will prevent your application from crashing because the buffer is written by code, and only the last built frame can have code-generated children. So if you build everything on a single frame, the base frame becomes the first and last child of that user form and can have as many children as it wants. In our case, we only need one, therefore I have written buffer1 right there. Here where we loop, I will run the buffer like so. You see, there is no difference so far except that the target here is the frame. Now here is another difference. At the end of this procedure, I will remove the buffer like so. However, this time I don't want to destroy the buffer because I want to use it again when I select a new property. Therefore, I won't select or set the destroyer to true. Now pay attention. Since the progress buffer is code generated, those objects must be destroyed eventually to save memory. So if I don't destroy the buffer objects here, I must find the terminate event of this user form, remove and destroy it there instead. This will ensure that the buffer objects will be destroyed first before the parent user form gets terminated. Trust me, if you don't destroy code-generated objects, they linger sometimes, and if they linger, they become a weight to your program. One final thing. If you are building the buffer on a frame that has a list view, list box, or anything built using a frame, those objects will become an obstacle to the buffer because they have a priority Z order. So here, before we run the buffer, we need to tell the system that the list view is an obstacle by writing buffer1 dot hide obstructing object is equal to list view 1. And this will hide the list view and then show it when the buffer is removed. Now if I run the user form, you will notice that everything is working perfectly. If you want to further customize the buffer, you can do so using the guidelines given in the worksheet demo. There are more properties here. You can even change the color of the buffer however you want. Now, what if your code is not looping and you are processing data step by step? Let's look into that next. I'm not going to share this file because it's a real file and the information is private. However, I will use it as an example. This application checks if there is a new file in a specific folder. If so, it examines the file, removes paragraphs, allocates accounts and specified projects to all transactions, pulls the transactions, checks for duplicates, removes them if found, pulls in new transactions, saves the files, and destroys the source file. However, there is no looping here. Everything is done step by step and the process takes time. I wrote this file roughly 5 to 6 years ago, but the code is still relevant even today. This is the buffer I wrote back then. It works fine, but let me upgrade and use a circular buffer instead. Let me drag the class module from our practice file. This is another way of importing the module. You can drag and drop from another file. I will declare a new instance of the class like so. Add a new form and then trace where I have been calling the old progress bar. In this procedure, I will replace this line by calling the circular buffer like so. I've already counted how many times this progress bar was called in this procedure and its sub-procedures. Hence, I wrote 9 here because I will also run the circular buffer 9 times. Instead of this, I will update the message like so, comment out these lines and then do the same with the rest. Point to note here is that when your code is not looping, just run the buffer on different sections of your code where heavy processing is done. Your total will be the number of lines you wrote. If you want to pin it, you can create a separate procedure for this, put this code in it, and then call the procedure in its stead. The number of times you called the procedure will be your total. As always, at the end of the procedure, we remove the buffer like so. You should also note that at different levels, I had to change and inform the user about what's happening now. Let's run the program and see what we get. Perfect. I like the upgrade. That's it. Thank you guys. Let's meet in the next project.